Nebraska farmers react to controversies at the state and national capital. Ahead on Grow, a look at the debate over Packer ownership of hogs and what the legislature decided. Plus, we have reaction to the final EPA Waters of the U.S. rule, including an interview with Senator Ben Sasse. And a familiar voice on farm radio turns off the mic. It's all ahead here on NTV's Grow. Some call it a victory for family farmers as Nebraska's ban on hogs owned by meat packers will stand. NTV's Grow co-host Steve White has been following this issue and has more.
Hog numbers in Nebraska have fallen behind other states. Some argued this could give that industry a boost, but concerns about China may have cemented the state's ban.
There's just something about Nebraska when I travel other states in ag that we're still that family farm mentality.
Nebraska lawmakers say they're looking out for the little guy.
And I want to make sure he's protected.
The state's ban on hogs owned by meat packers will stand.
Yes, we do things different in Nebraska than they do other states. And by the way, we also do it better because we are more environmentally responsible and we have more local ownership.
Senator Ken Shills of Ogallala argued Nebraska is losing ground to other states, and lifting the ban would help this important industry.
We can't discriminate against who does business here in the state.
Complicating the issue, China. More specifically, Chinese ownership of Smithfield Foods, the world's largest hog producer.
This is a part of China's effort to secure their national food security needs. But if you think about it, they really do that at the expense of our own domestic food security. That's not a good bargain.
Farm Bureau and the pork producers backed the bill. They say Nebraska needs to change the policy to be competitive. Livestock creates jobs and builds tax base in rural areas, they argue. But others argued it would be a major shift.
Structurally, economically, socially, and environmentally change the way that we produce hogs in the state of Nebraska.
Another livestock policy issue did get the governor's signature this week. It creates a scorecard to help local counties make zoning decisions on where to locate those livestock farms. It's called a matrix and will be a voluntary tool.
Another hot topic at the legislature, driver's licenses for so-called dreamers. And this is something that touches the world of agriculture. Nebraska cattlemen say immigrants are an important part of the workforce, especially for agriculture. They have supported the bill allowing driver's licenses for immigrants who fall under the Deferred Action Policy. Cattlemen say they support comprehensive immigration reform to ensure a thriving employee base for beef cattle production.
Certainly in the agricultural economy and the role that they play, there's a reason why the Nebraska cattlemen were such strong advocates and movers behind this bill. It was important to the Nebraska cattle industry and therefore important to all of Nebraska.
One thing many Nebraska lawmakers are not happy about: President Obama expanding clean water regulations across the country through the Waters of the United States rule. The move enlarges the reach of the 1972 Clean Waters Act under the EPA. It will now include smaller waterways. While many environmentalists are hailing the move, others call it another presidential power overreach. Nebraska U.S. Senator Deb Fischer went as far as to call it an attack on the people of Nebraska. Meanwhile, a coalition of Nebraska farm and business groups says the government has gone too far. The Common Sense Coalition includes Farm Bureau, cattlemen, and others. Farm Bureau President Steve Nelson said he has little confidence the EPA has listened to farmers and addressed their concerns. Nelson said, quote, "That lack of confidence is founded in the reality that early on the EPA and the Corps decided to use a campaign-type push for public support of this proposal." Meanwhile, Governor Pete Ricketts, he agrees He believes this ruling should be scrapped, saying, quote, "It is clear the administration failed to listen to the concerns of Nebraska's agriculture and business communities. This rule has the potential to saddle our farmers, ranchers, and other businesses with a huge, unwarranted regulatory burden," end quote. U.S. Senator Ben Sasse also sounding off on this move. NTV's Grow caught up with him in central Nebraska for his thoughts.
It's absolutely crazy that the best way to regulate Nebraska's water is supposedly from Washington, D.C. They don't understand the diversity of the water sources and uses that we have, and ultimately, I think the courts will one day strike down this huge governmental overreach. Ultimately, there are going to be a lot of diverse uses of water, and those things should be regulated at the county and at the state level wherever possible. A one-size-fits-all approach from Washington, D.C. for how to regulate streams and tributaries in Nebraska and in Vermont doesn't make any sense. The rule is supposed to clarify details that were not clear in the law. This rule is an outworking of the Clean Water Act from the 1970s, which did a number of very important things, but it self-consciously defined the federal government's powers as being about about regulating waterways that are navigable. Ultimately, what the EPA has done here is decide that the text of the statute doesn't matter, elected officials don't matter, and that Washington bureaucrats can make every decision for local producers and local counties and for our state.
Others say the new EPA rules are necessary protection against water pollution. The Natural Resource Defense Council stands with the EPA. The group says without adequate controls, it can lead to polluted swimming, drinking water, and even health problems. NRDC says the nation has fallen short of clean water goals set 40 years ago. The group says the EPA will exempt certain bodies of water next to agricultural land. NRDC says many of the farm arguments against the rule are bogus and say most Americans support the rule. Now, as to farmers trying to finish planting out there, many have run into some delays. Last week's rainfall across much of the state delayed fieldwork in Nebraska. USDA says 92% of the expected corn crop is in the ground, slightly behind average. Just over half of soybeans have been planted in Nebraska. Last year at this time, we were 85% done with beans. Sorghum planting is ahead of schedule, and winter wheat continues to be a mixed bag, most in fair to good condition. Because of rain and flooding, some producers now face planting and replanting decisions. For those acres that have not been planted, there are a few options. Nebraska Extension educators say crop insurance guarantees a 1% drop for every day planting is delayed after deadlines. Now, acreage that couldn't be planted could be left idle and receive a prevented planting payment. Cover crops could be an option. Contact your local extension educator for more. When it comes to double cropping, it is a growing trend as the demand for ag products grows as well. The National Association of Wheat Growers say the practice lets farmers expand production without expanding the acreage. Double cropping wheat and soybeans is the most common form during a single growing season. One of the biggest names in Nebraska farm media is retiring. KRVN radio farm director Mike Laporte is retiring from the station. He and his wife will be moving to Kansas to be closer to family. Laporte has been with the station for a quarter century. He says farm reporters are very important to keep farmers and ranchers up to date in an ever-changing world.
Take those things that are very key and kind of act like a clearinghouse so people can not spend their entire day going through information.
And Laporte adds Nebraska is one of the best states to be an agricultural journalist. He, of course, was featured on NTV's Good Morning Nebraska every day during the weekdays here, and we wish him the very best in his retirement. Meanwhile, a small herd of purebred bison in south central Nebraska is growing. At least 6 calves were born so far this spring. Animals are adjusting to their new home in more than 1,000 acres of tallgrass prairie southwest of Grand Island. Crane Trust officials say 5 heifers will give birth and add to the herd this year. Experts say of the 500,000 bison in North America, about 5,000 are genetically pure. They call it a victory for family farmers. Up next, here from Nebraska Farmers Union. We'll be back.